Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. What is this? Is it a new Star Trek game, you might ask? Well, no, I'm afraid not, but I suppose it's the next best thing. Those of you who like Star Trek, like me, have suffered for the longest time with a selection of games that has been a mixed bag at best. Star Trek Armada 3 is a mod for Sins of a Solar Empire, and it's certainly the closest we're going to get, at least for a while, to a decent Star Trek game. And I say this with very good reason, by the way, because the last Star Trek game, aka Star Trek, that came out in 2013, was one of the worst Star Trek games to ever exist. Why they thought it was a good idea to make a third-person cover-based shooter based in the current alt universe, I have no idea. We've had a rough ride over the last 20 or so years, if you happen to like Star Trek and also like video games. For every, say, Star Trek Starfleet Command, a really good ship sim, we get something like Star Trek DAC, a terrible downloadable game. What about, say, Star Trek Armada, the original version of that, a pretty good space-based RTS. Well, then we get Star Trek New Worlds, a terrible ground-based RTS. Ground-based! Who thought that was a good idea? Oh, we've had so many bad Star Trek games mixed in with the good ones. It's been pretty unfortunate. But Star Trek has been a very popular series to create mods about. Understandably so. We're saying, well, you know, what if there was a Star Trek mod for this? And it's happened with many games, including one of my personal favorites, Nexus: The Jupiter Incident. I used to play a multiplayer Star Trek mod for that was absolutely fantastic. Even existing Star Trek games like Bridge Commander were modded extensively to create new content and just make them even better. And now along comes Armada 3, a mod for Sins of a Solar Empire, which seems like a pretty natural fit. Sins of a Solar Empire, for those who don't know, it's an RTS with a 4X leaning. I wouldn't call it a 4X, because 4X strategy games very specifically refer to things like, say, Civilization or Master of Orion. Now, they don't have to be turn-based, but they do have to do a lot of stuff besides fighting, and honestly, Sins of a Solar Empire has some 4X elements, but it is mostly about fighting. Even with the second expansion pack for that diplomacy, it was still kind of about fighting. So, it makes sense to bring Armada, which was a space-based RTS, onto Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion. Let's have a look at it. So, the version we're currently running is the 0.95 beta, which is the first public release of Star Trek Armada 3, meaning there's a lot of stuff missing, so bear that in mind. If you're watching this video and you go to download the mod and it says that it's a higher version than that, well, some of the stuff in this video probably won't apply. But it's a fairly promising start, so let's have a look at exactly why that is. So I've got a couple of games that I have been messing around with that I can show you, but I'd rather start a new one initially to show you some of the initial features of the game. You can see it's an Odyssey class, by the way, for those of you getting very confused. It was actually a super heavy star cruiser that was brought into Star Trek Online. I suppose it's technically canon now, because a lot of the Star Trek Online stuff is, but yeah, you probably don't know what that is if you're used to the TV series and maybe the books. So let's start one off, shall we? We'll go with just something small. Let's see, Kid in my Discord, that sounds like a decent idea. Let's go with Kid in my Discord. Okay. Alright, so there's a bunch of Star Trek Armada 3 maps available here, as well as a whole lot of other stuff. Some of this stuff is, I believe, from the old game, from the actual original Sins of a Solar Empire. And then there's stuff that is very specifically named. So you've got, if you were to go to Blood Feud, for instance, you start on Kronos, and then you can take Praxis and Rua Penthe and all sorts of other places like that. But we'll go with Kid in my Discord. Alright. Game options are pretty much the same, as you might imagine, so nothing really unusual there. We're going to take normal start, and there's a good reason for that. And then you've got your victory options. You can have pretty much whatever you want there. Again, just the same as the original game. Okay, so, factions. Currently there are 4 of them. We've got Federation, Klingon Empire, followed by Romulan and Borg. Now, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this imagery was actually taken from Star Trek Online, because you can design an awful lot in there. It looks like it. It was either that or it was done in one of those 3D modeling programs like Poser. But whatever the case, that's where these assets came from. And the way that they've obviously modded the game is to take 2 different sides, yeah, because the original game had 3 sides, and then the expansion added in 2 factions for each, and just kind of split them down the middle. So this is probably using the human faction, and then these are 2 different races, at least in the mod, but coding-wise, they're actually factions. Yeah, I know. It's not really all that interesting, but I like to point it out anyway. So as you can see here, you can pick between these 4 races. Now, the Federation is the most complete right now. The Borg, I would say, is the least. As you can see, it doesn't even have the proper icons for a lot of stuff yet. It's still using these default Sovereign class icons. The Federation actually has proper models for each of them, whereas the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Star Empire are all using these outlines. They're still perfectly functional, but it seems like the Federation has had the most work put into it up to this point. The Klingon Empire is definitely playable. I actually played a game against a hard AI and dominated it, so that worked pretty well. Romulans, I haven't actually had a chance to try it. Now, playing the Borg, there's some odd stuff about the Borg, and I'll show that to you when I get the chance. We're going to start with the Federation here. There we go, and we will select something at random. The Klingons, there we go. And we're going to pump them up difficulty-wise. Put them on... I'll put them on unfair. Sounds like a good idea. The Klingons currently have a bug whereby... Well, it's not so much a bug, it's a design problem. They have very limited firing arcs, meaning that the AI's effective DPS is actually lower than it should be, so I'm cranking it up a little bit there. And also, let's pick our logo and make sure that we don't have the wrong one. As you can see, all of these icons are actually the... That's the Cardassian and Klingon alliance that I think was in the Mirror Universe, so that's not really all that helpful. We should be a Federation logo somewhere. There we go, that'll do. Oh, never mind. Try that one again. Cool, so at least we know exactly what that is. And then we'll pick the Klingons for that one. Alright, let's rock and roll, shall we? Let's get into this map and show you exactly what's going on with it. So, when assessing a mod, especially a total conversion, I think the most important thing to talk about initially is just how much it changes the original game. And this is something that, so far, I haven't really noticed a huge amount of when it comes to Star Trek Armada 3. It plays very similar, at least right now, to the original. So you'll notice that you've got your frigates there, your cruisers, capital ships, and Titans, just like Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion. Whenever I say original, by the way, I'm referring to Sins of a Solar Empire, not Star Trek Armada 1. All of the improvements are pretty much the same. The social and industry specialization, I actually have no idea if this was in Rebellion. I played a decent amount of Rebellion, but I never noticed this before. Maybe it was patched in later, I don't know. It could be in the DLC, but... Aside from that, you've got usual buildings. For some reason, they still have temp for dilithium and titanium extractors. I don't really know why that is. And then you can build your 2 research stations, in this case, Utopia type and Jupiter type for military and kind of civilian research. You got your Maelstrom type of capital ship building, as you can see here, which actually you don't start with. So that's something to bear in mind there. So that's how you get access to your capital ships, and your Maya type does everything else except for Titans. Aside from that, refinery station, trading post, communication array. Yeah, pretty much the same. And then some of the differences do come in when you're looking at the available items that you can grab for defense. And it depends on which faction you're playing as to what defensive items you actually have. Phaser turret is default, and then you've got torpedo turrets, hangar defense, repair, yeah, it's a mod. They haven't quite sorted a lot of the spelling out yet. And then your Camelot type construction thingy, which allows you to build your Titan. Now, the first interesting change to it, though, is the ability to immediately warp in a ship, yeah? A kind of a hero unit. You can get that straight away. It converts the Dark Armada ability from the original game. So let's say I want to warp in the Enterprise E. And here it is. There we go. So you actually start with this thing. It's a bit wonky, but you might... No, you want to maybe turn around there, Picard. Make it so. There you go. Now it's working properly. It came in at an odd angle. So as you can see, a Sovereign class vessel, Enterprise E, that you can rock around with if you so desire. And we'll give it a couple of squadrons of Danube-class runabouts. There we go. Now, what you will notice about this is that it is a capital ship, but it doesn't actually have any abilities, and it doesn't have the ability to level up either. So if you want to actually build a capital ship, which we currently can't do because we don't have a capital ship factory, then you will need to do the appropriate research. One of the biggest differences that I've noticed with this game is that, unlike Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion, where the capital ships are all available at the start and you just pick the one that you want, they're not available at the start here. To get a Sovereign class, which, as you might imagine, is just more powerful than an Ambassador class, you're going to need a lot of research stations. So if I want an Ambassador class as my first capital ship, which I probably do, and that's going to be what almost every Federation player is going to be forced to do, I've got to build a well, first I've got to build a Utopia-class research station. I've got to throw down a Maelstrom-type shipyard.
This is Captain Picard of the USS Enterprise.
And then I'll be able to actually research the Ambassador class. And the Ambassador class is kind of like the... whichever one of the battle cruisers that you get in the original game actually lets you colonize planets, that's the Ambassador class. So it's a little bit strange, and it's actually the case with all of the factions, from what I can tell, that they decided instead of just balancing all the capital ships, that they would make some just flat out more powerful, but you needed more research for them. So it's an interesting kind of system in dealing with power creep. But I also imagine that there's canon reasons for it. They don't want an Ambassador-class starship to be as powerful as a Sovereign class, because in the Star Trek canon, that's wrong, and all that kind of stuff. And it's something that you have to be a little bit careful with, especially when you're trying to appeal to Star Trek fans, because let's be honest, a lot of us are incredibly, horribly nerdy. So if you have an Ambassador-class beating up something ridiculous, like, say, a Negvar or whatever, then you're going to have people complaining about that. But you have to strike the balance and actually make the game playable for everybody. And that was a challenge that the original Star Trek Armada was trying to deal with the Borg, because if you've ever seen the Borg, at least outside of Voyager where they basically ruined them, then what you would notice is that the Borg in Armada were actually not that powerful at all. Even Borg cubes that are supposed to be able to beat up entire fleets would, well, they just couldn't, you know. In this game, they actually can, and I will show you a Borg cube, because I do actually have a Borg saved file, and I'll show you just how ridiculous that thing actually is. But the way that they're trying to balance the Borg in this game versus everybody else is to make things a hell of a lot more expensive and more difficult to get. So you have a really slow start with a very small number of ships, and you have to really struggle to expand early. But once you really get the cube running and you start to assimilate fleets, it becomes incredibly hard to stop them. So it's certainly something that they will have to work on. Alright, we're going to build an Ambassador class here. So that was the class used for the Enterprise C, which I believe was only shown on a single episode of The Next Generation, just for some interesting points there. Ah, there's a star over there. Yes, the Federation started on Kronos. Don't even get me started on that one. Alright, so just like the original game, whenever you come in to one of these star systems, you have to fight a bunch of neutrals. In this case, we actually have the Enterprise to help us out with that. And a bunch of runabouts. And off go the phasers and microphoton torpedoes and quantum torpedoes and all sorts of wonderful effects. And this is where things start to get really cool, because they put a lot of effort into the actual effects used in this game. And they also used voice samples from the series and the movies, also to great effect. Which is quite surprising, because removing that stuff and using the right quotes and not having it sound really janky is something that's a little bit difficult to do, and yet they managed to pull it off in fine style. Alright, so I think... were we still building that ship?
Standing by.
I assume so. And we have a couple of Saber-class escorts here that we can send over to help the Enterprise. Not that the Enterprise really needs any help right now. It's going to beat the snot out of everything. So, it's interesting that at the start of a regular Sins game, you would usually have a capital ship, and whichever capital ship you want. But in this case, they give you a hero ship, and you can actually warp it. If you lose it, you can warp in another one after a certain degree of time. And there are 3 different types. So the Defiant's a bit more of a faster escort, this is a larger cruiser, and then you've got the Intrepid class in the form of Voyager. I'm not really sure if they're properly balanced yet, but, well, that's just the way of it. So, it's a little strange if you're used to playing Sins of a Solar Empire that you can do that, but it does make a decent degree of sense. It's pretty clear that they wanted you to use quite a lot of capital ships, but they didn't want you to have access to loads of Sovereign-class vessels from the very beginning. They wanted to at least have some form of tech progression and tech tiers going on. As I guess it feels a bit wonky if you can start warping in Sovereign classes before you can even build Mirandas. I think that's probably what they were concerned about there. Aside from that, the game actually plays in a very similar fashion to Sins. So, the fighting is exactly what you would expect. Sometimes ships have abilities, some of them are on autocast, some are not. And you will be able to take over various planets by using colony ships and clearing out the neutrals. In this case, I think we're blowing up a bunch of random alien races to do that, which seems a bit weird for the Federation, to say the least, but that's just how it's going to be. Alright, well, we can't take that out yet. Let's go over there. Sending in the colony ship in order to take over Praxis. Research-wise, things are a little bit different. I've got to say. Some of the diplomacy stuff is quite interesting. You can have these mutually exclusive pacts, like you can have a Klingon tactical alliance, which will give you access to other tech and things like that, Klingon retrofits and all sorts, and some of these are very much mutually exclusive. You can even have a pact with the Romulans if you so desire. This doesn't, as far as I can tell, affect your ability to actually fight those guys in the game. It's just more of a tech choice option. The Borg are perhaps the strangest when it comes to that, because their playstyle is just a little bit different to everybody else. The Klingons of the Federation play in a fairly similar fashion, although I would say that the Federation are perhaps a little bit less aggressive, although the weird thing about something like Sins of a Solar Empire is that you've got to be aggressive really from the very start, and if you're not, then you're just wasting your own time, because you need to be able to grab as many planets as possible early on. So how different is it really? Is it like a really good total conversion? I would honestly go as far as to say that, you know, for a Star Trek fan, it's really cool to see something like this, but I was maybe hoping, and perhaps this is something that will actually happen in future, that they would actually go out of their way to really change things around and make things highly unusual. Because right now, it feels like playing Sins of a Solar Empire with a Star Trek coat, and I'm okay with that because I kind of love my Star Trek coat. I mean, look at this bloody thing. The model quality is really, really nice. If you zoom all the way in to some of the smaller ships, you will notice the texture quality isn't quite there, but we are talking about a game that's supposed to be able to support hundreds of ships in one sector at any given time, so overall, the actual model quality is really nice. There's a good amount of detail there. The effects are what impress me the most. Authentic use of sound effects, as well as perhaps more importantly, authentic use of visuals like photon and quantum torpedoes and phaser arrays. What's also really cool is the larger ships can do multi-targeting pretty well, so you get that Star Trek feel. This is not Star Wars, where it's a lot of fighter craft. It's larger vessels that are swinging around, firing multiple phaser banks. It's like tall ships, right? It's tall ships in space instead of dogfights. You know, Star Wars was kind of like World War II dogfighting. This was more like tall ships in space. However, at the moment, some of that really nice immersion value is kind of ruined simply because the way that these ships handle doesn't quite work. This is really the case with the Klingons right now because they have very limited firing arcs, but some of the smaller ships as well for the Federation have problems like that, and maybe you even saw it with the Enterprise when it was fighting earlier, is that instead of sort of doing an orbit around the target it's attacking and firing with all weapons, it tends to run directly at the target, then turn around and run backwards, and then do the same thing again. Now, you can micro the larger ships to ensure that that does not happen, but it seems like they need to change the pathing behavior of a lot of these ships in order to actually work properly. Is my ambassador class actually built yet? There it is. There's my ambassador. So, I always liked the design of the ambassador class. It was a nice little piece of history. Bit chunkier. Smaller than a galaxy class, obviously, but you can see the history and you can see where the design evolution came from. But, I mean, that's a nice model. That's a pretty good model. I think the only thing that I would like to see, which is not really something that you generally see in Sins because they like to have a lot of flat textures without effects because they want it to run on multiple machines and make sure that it runs on low configurations, is just like animation on the nacelles or anything like that. But aside from that, good lighting, really, really nice use of everything there. And in this case, they haven't done a huge amount to change what this actually does here, because colonize and I think remodulate shields are very similar to, in fact, maybe identical to the functionality of the ships in Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion. So they basically just tacked those abilities on. Although I think shared warp field and long-range scan are possibly a little bit different. So it's not that they've kept everything identical. I actually saw some pretty significant differences with some of the Klingon ships. Okay, let's load up another save file. I want to show you the Borg, because the Borg, I think, have the most promise for being a really interesting playstyle. So far, what you're seeing from this mod is that it's a mod for Sins of a Solar Empire, and it's not a huge, sweeping selection of changes. Things are a little bit different, but they're not hugely different. However, when you have, where is it? Is it here? There it is. Hey, it's my Borg Cube. Look at how ridiculous that thing is. It has 16,000 shield points and 17,000 hull. It can target multiple craft at the same time. Its average cutting beam damage is 384. It's an absolute monster with 9 armor. and it levels up, so you can get assimilation beam. And as you'll notice, it basically assimilated all of the ships here. Now, it would be nice if they put an assimilation texture on that, but it's built a fleet, for God's sake, and it did it on its own. It didn't need any support whatsoever. Now, before you get a Borg Cube, the Borg are a little bit weird to fight with. Things are not going too well over here, because you can't build many ships. They're very, very expensive. So if I wanted to build a frigate, let's say a Borg dodecahedron, that's over 1,000 credits. That's a lot of money. Even the standard Borg interceptors cost they cost like the same as 4 corvettes. So that's a lot, but they're also pretty powerful. So that's something to note there. So you have to fight with a small number of ships, and you've really got to micro them and control them and make sure you don't lose them, because losing even a single ship as the Borg early game can be very, very painful. Now, in this case, the pirates keep trying to attack this moon, but I've got defense nodes, which are pretty good. Even the Borg defense nodes are more costly than most of the other ones. They're armed with torpedoes and cutting beams and all sorts of things. So they're reasonably effective at fighting these pirates off, but unfortunately, they are also a little bit limited in terms of their actual range. There we go. He's going to get ripped to pieces. Borg weapons are really, really powerful. Now, where did the cube go? Has the cube moved out yet? There it is. All right. Let's watch the Borg Cube in action against everything. Because, as you might imagine, it's going to rip everything to shreds. It's very, very good at what it does. Incredibly good at what it does. So, there's a bunch of photon torpedoes coming out, which do almost nothing, really. And then these frigates are just going to get absolutely wrecked very, very fast. It can target several ships at once. The actual damage it can do is absurd. The shields on these are already down. And then it also has the assimilation beam, which is even more nasty, because that actually boards the ship, assimilates the ship, and then gives you control of it. And that's on an auto-cast with a fairly short cooldown as well, so it's pretty ridiculous. I can move this into the center, and this Borg Cube will fight off this entire fleet on its own. This is something that they're going to be changing. I believe they said they were going to make the Borg Cube further down the tech tree so that it was much harder to get. You have to invest a lot to get one early, but once you've got one, really you can't be beaten. You could send this into a piece of enemy territory, and you couldn't beat it. Like, you just don't have the firepower. Borg ships, more often than not, have the ability to regenerate their shields very quickly and also increase their shield mitigation. As you can see here, they adapt. So you can get up to like 80% shield mitigation, so they barely take any damage at all. The Borg Cube just does not care about anything here, and it's already taken over all of these ships. So it's kind of silly. But it's also the most interesting of the races that I've found so far. I think it's really, really intriguing to see a race that is based around all sorts of different ways of taking on your opponent, not having this gigantic fleet. My actual main Borg fleet is like 4 interceptors in the dodecahedron, and then I've got another fleet, I think, over here. So I lost quite a lot of Borg ships early on, and you've just got to be really, really careful with what you do. And that's cool. I like that idea. They also have the ability to warp pretty much anywhere, which is nice. They have very, very fast warp out times, and they can do all sorts of really cool stuff. Alright, the final thing that I'd like to show you would be my Klingon game, if I can actually find it. I think that was under... Was it under Blood Feud? Yeah. I need to pick the right one. I think it's this one. Played about 3 hours of this. There we go. Now, this one, I'm actually having a good fight with the Romulans, and I think I have a fairly large... At least, I had a large fleet, but we had a huge fight that really decimated all sorts of different places, and this... I have a space dock here designed to defend this against the attacks of the Romulans, because they've been attacking here, and then pirates have been attacking here. There's an open rebellion actually going on over here, which inexplicably managed to get hold of a bunch of Miranda-class ships, and I think that's a Borg vessel. I don't know. Things are not going well. And then I have a couple of Deathrite cruisers that are trying to get the hell out of there. Oh dear. Things getting a bit messy, and as it turns out, that actually crashed the game. But there you go. That's a mod for you. My apologies, just getting back from the crash. I think I ended up losing a colony there to a massive rebellion, and somehow that caused the game to crash, but hey. I've been having a lot of fun with it so far, but I would definitely say that if you're looking for something that completely shakes up the way that Sins works, then you're not gonna find it here. There are some really interesting additions like minefields and the there's these big sort of command centers that you can get for the Klingons, and some of the ships work in different ways, but a lot of them seem to be reskins of existing ships. Examples I would give here. Let's go to Kronos and say, all right, I want to build a frigate. Okay, well, that's just your basic exploration. There's your basic frigate. There's the one that has the longer range to it. That's the Planetary Bomber. That's the anti-fighter frigate. That's the Corvette. These are all from the original game, right? So, unless you're playing the Borg, then the roles of the different ships are very similar to what we saw in Sins of a Solar Empire. So, if you didn't like Sins, this won't make you like Sins, because it plays the same, for the most part. I imagine there's a lot of more subtle differences that people who play Sins an awful lot might end up noticing. Some interesting stuff, say, with the Planetary Bombers here. They use Planetary Terror, which makes them very effective bombers because it does planetary damage and population killing every second, which is kind of neat. But still, if you look back at it, it's like, well, why are these Katinga-class ships just kind of regular planetary bombers? That doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. That isn't kind of supported by the canon or whatever. So I think that when you make a total conversion, a lot of people expect more from you than that. They expect this idea of a complete and totally new experience. And this is not a completely, totally new experience. It's close to being one. Very close to being one. But I think they need to make some significant changes. It could also come down to the fact that they don't really explain the ships very well. A lot of these descriptions are very, very similar. In fact, they're pretty much the same for the most part. This one says it can be upgraded with an area of effect attack. I haven't found that anywhere in the research tree, so I don't know what I'm looking for here to try and find that. This is just a damage increase, so I don't know if this is AoE or anything like that. A lot of these descriptions are very similar or identical to the old ones. So I think once they redo the tooltips, we may be able to figure out exactly what the ships are supposed to do, and then we'll see more differences. But as it stands, I'm building ships based on the descriptions, and it's saying, oh, well, this will happen, and sometimes, well, it doesn't. So it's hard to say exactly whether or not the game has truly changed things, or whether it's just put a Star Trek skin over this particular title. But you know what? That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing that it tried to do that. In fact, it's a very good thing that they did that, because a lot of us have been kind of desperate for a Star Trek game, I think, for quite some time. And this game does provide that, and it does a pretty good job at it, too. Even if it's using something else as a baseline, I think it's doing a pretty good job of making an enjoyable Star Trek experience. Should you download it? Well, yeah, if you're into Star Trek, you absolutely should. It's probably not balanced for multiplayer as of yet. It actually seems fairly unlikely that it's balanced for multiplayer at all right now. But as it stands, it's still a fun game. That's perhaps the thing that you should consider the most. It's a fun game. And if you like Sins, then you've really got no reason not to install the thing and see exactly how fun it is for you. It may very well end up being a really cool experience. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you was actually the Klingon Titan that I'm currently trying to build. I'm gonna send these ships in to try and deal with this. Currently, the pirates are attacking yet again. We have a lot of defensive stations, so it's gonna be pretty difficult for the pirates to do anything, as well as antimatter mines and all sorts of things like that. But I'm gonna send in some ships to try and clean this out. But I'm still trying to build the... This is the shockwave facility, so the Titan should be... Yeah, it's being built there. You can see it right there. Should be there in a second. Takes a rather long time to build the Titan, unsurprisingly. Weird stellar phenomenon going on. Bring the rest of my ships in as well. Just for the hell of it, you can see a reasonably sized battle. Seems like a good idea. And I actually just want to try this Titan out because I haven't ever had the chance to actually play with it. Increase the game speed here, so it comes up a little bit quicker. And then we can get our ships involved in this fight. There's our Vorchar class attack cruiser that has the ability Grievous Insult, which I quite like. Man, I just, what I do really like about this mod is just how many guns are on some of these ships, and the multi-targeting thing just looks absolutely fantastic. Like, it's really hard to argue with those photon torpedo effects and the multi-targeting of those ships and all sorts of other crazy stuff that they can actually do. I love that. I really do. That's, I think, the most kind of redeeming thing about this mod right now. And it does have a lot of potential. Once they've got the basics down, once they've got the tooltips right, they're already using good quality models, they've already got good quality assets. They just need to get the balance right and then really start to distinguish the factions from each other. Because right now, the Klingons and the Federation are very, very similar. The Borg is really the only faction that's different. I haven't really played the Romulans yet, but from what I fought against them, and they seem very, again, very, very similar. They don't really seem all that sneaky, from what I can tell. In come my corvettes that are mostly on fire. I want to see if the shockwave's been built yet. I hope so. Still hasn't been built. Disappointing. How long does this bloody thing take? Quite a long time. Okay, let's increase the speed. 6 times speed. There we go. So this is the shockwave, which is supposed to be a Titan. It's not that big, though. I think it's just its effects are probably the most important thing. Ah, okay, so it's got a super blast thing going on for it. So it's not a huge ship, but they actually haven't added any abilities into it yet either. I assume that they made the Titan in this game similar to the kind of super weapons that you could build. But yeah, that is the Titan, which is not quite as impressive, I think, as the Odyssey class yet. They certainly need to put some more work into that. But hey, it's a work in progress. So yeah, you should definitely have a look at this if you're into Sins of a Solar Empire or Star Trek in any real respect. And it looks promising for the future. Right now, if you're looking for something that has massive changes, you're not really going to find that. But you will find something that has some rather entertaining Star Trek battles, which is something that's just a little bit hard to find these days, I'm afraid. As much as I would like to tell you otherwise. Did I just activate Shockwave? I'm not actually sure what that does. Oh, it blows the ship up. That, what? Oh. I think I may have made a horrible mistake. Kaplar indeed. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Check it out, folks. Star Trek Armada 3 is currently available right there on ModDB. You can download it in the description below this video. And I'll see you next time.